Welcome.
Is this on? Oh, there it is. Hi, good morning. I'm going to just give everybody a second to come find a seat. Come on in. Bring it in. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody taking the time this morning to come join our session. As a brief introduction, my name is Jeff Bristol. I'm the Divisional Vice President for NEMRA Lighting. Most of you may be familiar with NEMRA Lighting. Obviously, we have several partners here, which I appreciate seeing you all, and several folks that are not only interested in the association, but obviously the speech today. So just a quick overview of the lighting division of NEMRA. It's the division's goal to create stronger partnerships between the agencies, the lighting agencies, and the lighting manufacturers that are part of the division. And we do that through a variety of ways. We do that through advocacy efforts. We do that through educational efforts, such as the new stepped educational curriculum that was launched in the middle of August, a really powerful tool now for our members to be able to train and educate their employees in a online, self-paced way. We're very fortunate to have worked with the IES on this program. And then through networking and business planning efforts, obviously a network event like this and business planning things like the lighting conference that is scheduled for the fall of 2026, which will give our members the opportunity to meet and work together and perform any number of tasks, including business planning. But you're not here to hear me. You're here to hear this guy. And so with that, I would like to introduce Umesh Behedi, a friend and a former colleague. I'm just going to read this because it sounds much more impressive when I do. Umesh Behedi is an accomplished executive with 20 years of experience in product management, engineering, M&A, and operational excellence across multiple industries. As SVP of Product and Engineering at Maxlight, he leads strategy, drives innovation, and builds strategic partnerships to expand the company's LED lighting and IoT portfolios. Under his leadership, Maxlight launched the award-winning CMAX lighting controls platform. Previously, Umesh developed product and software innovation roadmaps for Amazon Go and held leadership roles at Philips Lighting, Ventana Core Partners, USB Investment Bank, and Coherent and Kennemental. So with that, my good friend, Umesh Behedi.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. I know some people travel from California, different parts of the country, so I'm going to try to keep this session engaging and, more importantly, fun. Right? So it's about learning, understanding where controls are going. And more importantly, I think about IoT quite deeply as a technologist. That's my side passion. I love understanding how do we make tech friendly for people, and how do we elevate sort of the experience that customers will benefit from your products. So I'm going to go through the presentation here. There are probably about 4 different sections. All right. Sorry, 1 second. Just give me 1 second. All right. So, couple of learning objectives. The idea here would be after the 30, 40 minutes of me talking, and hopefully you'll have some more questions. And we should be able to at least address some of these open questions as to why controls is actually growing. How do we cut through the control chaos? I know there are some lighting designers here, some manufacturers. And so when we think about controls, what is the right strategy to specify those controls? What is the framework you're going to use to specify your controls, especially when there's technology elements involved? We'll try to demystify the myth of wireless controls. You definitely see a lot of uptake in the adoption of wireless controls, and we'll talk about some stats on that. And then LLC, this is not your LLC you form as a separate company. This is luminaire level lighting controls, and this is a new upcoming trend that we see in the market today, right? And so we'll talk more about the prominence of that and what it actually does for you in terms of simplicity and unlocking more intelligent data value sets that you get out of the luminaire level lighting control. So, couple of disclaimers. I'm even though I work for Maxlight, this isn't a Maxlight presentation. This is really for the industry awareness and how controls are evolving. So, this is sort of my view, not my company's view. So, I want to be very clear about that. I do reference certain products just because I didn't need to get permission from other manufacturers to use the product images. I've taken the time to look at the factual references. There's a lot of data here in the industry. I don't want to give a shout out to some of the folks here in the audience, Lighting Controls Association, the NEA, PNNL, the industry social media teams, the Lighting Control podcast. I have used all these different materials to form my opinion and how I see the industry is evolving. So that's what that is. And then again, I said I'm more of a technologist. I'm an engineer at heart, but I'm not a social media guy. So this is not my forte of creating excellent PowerPoint charts. So I did use AI tools and had to put some prompt into them to tell me exactly what I wanted to look like. So that's basically what that was. So the agenda is broken down into 4 different sections. When we'll start with sort of the market mandate, right? Why we cannot ignore lighting controls. And when you look at, what are the industry drivers that is shaping up the adoption for controls in general, right? Network controls now more relevant. We're going from sort of those basic controls to that network control tier. And then how does the LLC play a big role into that, right? So we'll kind of address some of those key points. And then I want to really help you guys understand how I think about specifying controls, right? So this is sort of my view, I'm trying to take you to a journey here around looking at the paradigm shift that we are seeing in specifying controls. So here you're going to look at some trade-offs when it comes to centralized controls versus using distributed controls. What is the definitions of those? Wired versus wireless, and then really the strategy around, do I use an open protocol or do I use basically a proprietary protocol to actually go and solve the needs for my customer? And then last but not least, I want to leave sort of a forward thinking thought on what is the future. So if you were to specify controls today, how are you future proofing your customers, your audience for the new technologies that are going to emerge 2, 3, 5 years from now? So let's talk about sort of the evolution of lighting controls, right? So this pictorial view sort of talks about, from the 1950s when we basically were just using an on-off light switch, right? To now where we're heading is more luminaire level lighting control. So you have zone panels, you have, the system has evolved then to like network systems where you have gateways that you put into it. and you're able to talk to your lighting network. Uh, but the evolution is clear today that more and more specifications are being driven towards LLLCs, luminary level lighting control. And that gives you a lot more granularity, right, at the local zone level. And it's many cases is actually completely autonomous functions, right? You don't need a central master deciding, how the behaviors of those individuals zones or the rooms are going to be dictated through what you would typically see through a gateway based application. But in the case of LLLCs, these devices are getting extremely smart. Today, you have applications where it's not only just motion, you can put environmental sensing along with that, and you're able to extract data that is not just motion sensing, but it's also temperature, humidity, and so many other things, right? So we're definitely seeing more and more of this adoption. And you look at the market projections and the growth metrics, and this is obviously, could be completely debatable because a lot of this information is actually not public, right? But there are many folks in the industry who are going out and researching this and this very important topic. And as the lighting industry continues to evolve, when you're looking at in some cases, a low single digit growth, and in today's times with tariffs and everything else, who knows, right, how things are evolving. But what is clear is that the controls piece for many of the manufacturers is absolutely growing, right? And you look at the growth metrics, there is expected CAGR of basically compounded average growth of 12 to 18%, right? And this is not just what we are observing sort of as a company, as a small manufacturer, but when I talk to my colleagues in the industry, I hear the same thing, right? The controls piece is growing. It was a low single digit number as an overall sales for the organizations, but now those numbers are actually kind of going up, becoming in a lower double digit numbers, or sometimes actually a little bit higher double digit numbers as well. So this is a huge opportunity, right, for the industry, and that is something that I think we all have to understand and take advantage of in how we specify sort of lighting controls on a go forward basis. And when you look at sort of the reasons behind it, and we'll get into that detail, but like our country is going through some massive energy trends, right? You're talking EV, you're talking data centers for AI. All that requires a lot of energy, right? So how do you basically fund that energy, right? So energy avoidance still is the right way of doing so, and controls plays a very big role in that. I'll show you some stats around what kind of savings do you get by adding network lighting controls, beyond sort of the LED savings you would get when you do the conversions. So we'll focus on those slides in a minute. So let's look at since this topic was smart node, what the heck is smart node, right? So people will ask this question. This is really more of uh, a networking terminology. So when you talk about a network, the idea with the network is that you will have multiple devices, and these devices have the intelligence to talk to each other. They have the intelligence to understand what you're saying and then relaying that information. So we're talking about a control signal. So if a sensor detects you, there is basically a PIR sensor or a microwave sensor that is sensing the motion of it, but then electrically sending a signal saying that, hey, I detected somebody, right? And because of that, here is sort of the voltage you get. You interpret that voltage and you send a command to your central system saying, behave in a certain way. So that's really what a node means. Um, and now, when you think about this right-hand chart here, what's really happening is that we're looking at this balance here. You're going from a traditional luminaire fixture to now a smart node LLC, and we'll get into the definition of that. But the manual on-off, the passive lighting control, the single illumination function now is evolving to more of an autonomous function. It's becoming more and more wireless, and then you're embedding sensors and controllers into every single fixture. So DLC has a good definition. Yes, there's a lot of folks who actually articulate the definition of LLC. So LLC is a subset of network lighting controls, but the key definition of LLC is that it's a one-to-one relationship with a light point, right? So you're going to take a light fixture and you're going to actually make that smart, either through a node which only has the Bluetooth radio to transfer information, or you would add a sensor to it that actually will do something. So it will sense, it will detect motion, or look at daylight harvesting, for example. But those are your embedded controllers that now we're finding in the LLCs. So this is where we are seeing as a manufacturer significant growth. and one of the reasons for this topic of a smart node. And the paradigm shift, again, we talked about here was you want to build a system resiliency, right? So when you have a system that actually it's smart enough that you take a look at this lights, right? You have these, up down fixtures, let's just say reflected ceiling now. And if one fixture were to go down, right? In the old days, if this were a zone control and that zone controller failed, you would have no lights here, right? But with the LLCs, it's very unlikely you're going to actually lose all 12, 13 luminaires at once. So you build more system resiliency by having these localized controls available at a fixture level. So that's basically what a smart node concept is. So let's understand the reasons behind the LLC revolution. I call their option, however you want to think about that. There are some key industry drivers that are shaping up sort of this adoption curve, right? So there is absolutely a convergence of needs that are happening. One is the big regulatory push. You are looking at most states in the country have been mandated by DOE to adopt some kind of an energy code. Right? In our industry today, ASHRAE is probably one of the most prevalent energy codes for commercial buildings, and then the IECC, can also be used for commercial, mostly given for residential type of constructions. So these two codes and Title 24, obviously California has its own setup of that. They're absolutely driving the adoption of controls, and especially network lighting controls. Then you have folks who are not only just looking at, hey, how is the lights working, right? But what is the occupancy comfort? So the wellness standards, the LEED standards, how do you become green, right? There's absolutely an awareness in the industry. And folks like us in the broader industry is driving some of those behaviors where you're trying to make circular economy work, right? We don't want to have a lot of waste. Our landfills are filled with a lot of different things. So how do we become good industry stewards in promoting these green technologies? And then there's the business needs, right? So today, a hospital is no longer just satisfied with lighting for patient, but we want an ability to use the light and the power of light to actually improve the well-being of the patients, right? We want asset tracking in our operations because we don't know where our inventory was sitting 2 days ago, right? And how are we going to actually monetize some of those returns on our working capital if we don't know where your assets are? So the business needs are absolutely evolving. And then last but not least, the technology enablers, right? So having worked at Amazon and seen how Amazon kind of took a step at innovation and how things were actually evolving, I believe that no industries just grow in an isolated way, right? There's always a influence around new technologies come, emerge, and that build a platform for other industries to actually thrive, right? So AI didn't happen overnight, right? In 2022, when Sam Altman came out with OpenAI, the AI research was done in IBM probably 30 years ago. So this was in the research labs for many years. But for that to have happened, right, you have to build the right semiconductor chips. You have to have the capacity in your foundries to be able to create these silicon chips, right? And those cost points have to come down to be able for you to afford these kind of solutions. And we are seeing that today, right? So the sensors today are not that expensive. And with those technologies, you are able to unlock a much bigger value. So this technology, convergence from the other industries is not something to be ignored. And that's the benefit we're seeing here, and we should take advantage of. This chart, I wanted to kind of zoom in a little bit more on the adoption state for our country, and also highlights the long runway that still exists for controls, right? So when we look at the growth we are seeing for controls, say 20% growth, 30% growth, right? Especially in the wireless sector, the adoption by different states. And what I tried to do here was I try to focus on the definition of LLCs in the different energy codes for the different states. For example, in the great state of Texas, the energy code here is 2015. The ASHRAE code is 2013. They're still pretty dated, actually, right? But you look at other states like California, state of Washington, the New England states, they pretty much have adopted the more latest IECC codes and or the ASHRAE codes, right? And Title 24 right now is going through their draft of the 2025 version, right, which is going to have a lot more request and demand for LLC controls. So there is still a lot of runway left in adopting some of these things. And as I said, the DOE is absolutely mandating every state to provide justification for why they have not chosen an energy code. So they have a deadline for March 2026 to adopt basically a latest standard of 2022, ASHRAE 2022. I talked about sort of the adoptions in the different states. And then again, the whole point here is that today I work in in New Jersey, but in Connecticut, Eversource as an example, they're a utility there. They are pretty much mandating only LLCs, right? So you actually get more rebates only if you have controls added to your luminaire. So just plainly, you're not going to get a whole lot of rebates if you just put lighting products. And we're hearing that more and more from the utility community that given the studies that have been done, there is absolutely more energy savings to be eked out of that system if there were to be LLC. Next, we'll go into those details. So here is some, real snapshots, and I put down the sources here so you can absolutely look at them for yourself, or happy to provide more details. But in general, the DLC case study, the studies that NEA has done, and one of my friends here, Chris, is here from NEA, we can vouch to this effect that on an average, you're getting almost 47, 50% energy saving just by adding in network lighting controls, right? Now, the nuance of LLC, and plenty of studies here, where NEA did a case study back in 2020 with about 194 buildings, and almost split 50-50 between the impact of LLC versus no impact of LLC, and what kind of benefits do you see. 74% savings in an office application, for example, right? This is beyond LED conversion savings, right? We are talking about pure savings from adding controls. So your ROI, the impact you're making on your energy savings, it's huge, right? And so, and then the other element was, again, the same study that's referenced here, 63% on an average for LLC performance compared to non-LLCs only gave you 35%, right? So that delta is actually quite significant. All right. So this is what the proof point is for LLCs. And I'm also referencing some other industry case studies that have been done. So Lawrence Berkeley NAV was very much involved in setting up the New York Times building back in early 2000. I think it was a 2007 study. And then they followed this up with the Living Lab project. And this is a quote from Steve Mesh, one of the industry folks who talks about lighting controls. And he's done a lot of projects. He's a lighting designer himself. And so when I talked to him, and when I listened to sort of his podcast, a lot of these things are also indicating that it's not just the energy savings, but when you think about the total cost of ownership on a project, luminaire level lighting control is actually benefiting you significantly more than just your traditional zone-based network controls, right? So these are some proof points that I have noticed that are absolutely real when it comes to the LLC studies. All right, so let's go to the second section. So this is, I want the folks to kind of understand here, this is a framework, right? So framework meaning this isn't a cut and dry that, the world only, there's a dichotomy. I mean, there's a hybrid models, there is a model that lives on the left side, the model that lives on the right-hand side, right? So when we think about decision making, right, it's about the architecture. How are you going to architect this system? Is it a centralized system or is it a distributed system? So when we talk about centralization versus distributed system, what does that mean? It really means about the control knowledge, right? The intelligence of controls. Who is making the decisions, and where does that decision making lies? So if I have a gateway that is actually controlling the schedules of these lights, right? That gateway could be somewhere over there. And those gateways are then relaying information to your zones and everything else to behave in a certain way. That is more of a centralized, nervous system, right? When you look at the distributed nervous system, I call, there you have all these different devices in the zone. They have the capabilities of doing their own thing, right? It's a completely autonomous operation. But you look at the pluses and minuses on the right-hand chart here, right? So when it comes to reliability, I think I gave the example of a power pack that was controlling all these lights. And if that power pack were to go down, you would lose all these different lights, right? Compared to a distributed system, you would not have that event happen. So you get that, as a consideration. Then it comes to scalability, right? A central server would only have so much capacity. You have to update that. But in the case of a distributed system, you can actually create these networks and kind of grow them as they go along, right? So you get a lot of impact on scalability, and you're able to take your systems to a much different level. And then you have, again, when it comes to the flexibility, the response time, and the total cost, what you would see is that the infrastructure cost is significantly higher in a central system compared to a distributed system, right? So this is where we have to think through the lens of not only today's bill of material cost, but the future impact of the callbacks and the things you're going to have with a central system that you would potentially avoid with a distributed system. So let's talk about briefly, the myths in wired and wireless. I get these questions many times. We as a company, we have both systems. I think there is room for both, but clearly there is a myth that wireless doesn't work. It's not reliable. It is hackable. That's not true. There is a lot of standards written very specifically to prove the point that this is absolutely cyber secure. And then when it comes to non-reliability, right? The today's mesh networks are completely self-healing, which means if you lose a node and it stops talking to you in your network, the signal will bounce around and go talk to the different node, right? So you're still able to carry through your operations really well. You may maybe lose one or two signal points, but that's sort of the myth. But these are how you can debunk some of these myths. So let's think about this question, right? What do you think, phone could do that was impossible 20 years ago, right? For an example, right, mobile banking. Today, we are able to pay our bills on the phone, right? Our health records, we can check, right? You can sign your contracts and don't even have to go for closing of your own homes, and you can do this on your phone, right? So the reality is, if we can trust wireless for our future, for finances, and for our health, right? Why can we trust wireless for our buildings, for our lighting systems, right? So that sort of is a point to think about, and how we sort of evolve from being a wired system to sort of a wireless system. So why is wireless winning? Lots of good points around this, right? But you can read through that. Again, it's the simplicity. Wireless just basically means there's no wires, right? Today you're communicating all these single messages through wireless systems. But does it mean that this is the holy grail and this is the best thing ever? No, there are still limitations on some of these things. There is range limitations. So when you are actually talking to the devices, you need to have resiliency that those messages are actually being heard by the other devices over there. So that's what drives sort of the decision making here. So this isn't to say the wired systems of the past are bad. There are certain applications in the industry where you have RF interference and communication issues. You would go for a wired system. Anything related to national security, those specs, most of the government specs today are all based on wired systems, right? So it's not possible to get rid of that. But doesn't mean that you cannot work with a wired and a wireless system, right? So these choices are actually available to anybody today. So let's get into now sort of a very debatable and thorny issue for a lot of people, right? And this could actually be a session of its own. How many of you are Apple fans? How many are Android fans? There you go, right? So we live in both worlds, right? And there's nothing wrong with Apple or Android, right? And my depiction here was try to put a wall garden, right, and show the Apple logo here. But Apple has done a great job, right? That ecosystem is solid. They as a company today are $3 trillion company, and they didn't get there without having good technology. So clearly there is this is a real good choice, right? How do you adopt open protocol versus proprietary protocols? And so when you think about some of the trade-offs, here are some points to think about, right? There is, in a proprietary system, typically what you would see is that you get a lot of seamless integration of systems, right? When you think about open standard, you get competitive pricing, you have multiple vendors, and there is no vendor lock-in, right? So if those are your important considerations, you have a choice to make around if you want to prefer a proprietary system or an open standard system. So here is an example of, say your client was a a very significant corporation came to you and said, I want lighting controls, but I want full integration into my VMS system, I want full integration with my ERP system, so on and so forth. So in that situation, open scan is probably not the right approach for you, right? Proprietary may be the right way to kind of go and approach that. But if you are in a situation where you have a retail store and you're doing a multi-store rollout and cost points are important, it doesn't matter to them you're in California or in Connecticut or Nevada, you would you would probably choose a open system in that case, because you do get multiple choices, and you're able to actually provide a much better service to your client. So there is no real single right answer. There's nothing wrong about proprietary or not. Um, the right path really depends on your client's needs and and the budget requirements that the client may pose on you. So that's sort of the trade-off discussion. Now let's get into sort of the heart of the IoT piece of it. And my son, who is 14 years old, now learning algebra and getting into like advanced math in his college. So I've thought about like my engineering days and looking at differential equations. Right, this isn't that. Very very simple math. The value of controls is more than energy savings, right? And the delta really is the data that you get out of that, right? And so the idea here is that smart device, that smart node today, if it can give you more intelligent information that you can use as an insight to make better decisions, um, eke out more value, right, for your building, for your customers, you get that capability for that. Um, so I'm not going to go through all the use cases, but one of the use cases I want to highlight here is the HVAC integration. Right, there's a lot of talk in the industry today. I think there are a few other topics on that conversation. So I want to tee up for those other audience there on what HVAC integration might mean, with lighting. So here is a use of energy in our buildings. This is done through DOE, and you will see that it's a significant portion of the energy consumption is for HVAC, right? And that currency of HVAC to lighting is almost 3 to 1. So if you save, 1 unit of HVAC saving, that's equal to 3 units of lighting saving, right? So we talked about 74% savings for LLC, but how do you now advance that? What is the next frontier of energy savings that you can unlock? And that will come from this something like HVAC integration. And today, there are many companies, focusing on sort of the large BMS integration. So bigger buildings are focusing on BMS, and then the smaller buildings, there's big case studies going on looking at sort of the small buildings and looking at the RTUs. And Chris, you're doing a lot of work on that. I know with many other companies. And so these studies are going to be published very, very soon. And you will see that uh, the savings here could be quite significant, right? 10% maybe is more of a conservative base case, but you could have savings going as high as like 30%. And these are the case studies I can point to that kind of illuminates, shed some light on those kind of savings, right? And then Bluetooth NLC, right? So this is a brand new standard that recently released a profile to actually integrate sort of your lighting along with HVAC without needing extra devices, right? Many other solutions today, you need to have some gateways or some other devices in the equation to be able to marry these two different systems. But newer technologies are evolving now today that gives you the ability to actually directly talk to the thermostats and and save those savings. So how do you get those savings? It's very simple, right? We are so conditioned to turning our lights on and off, but how many times do we go leave our office and think about, did I change my thermostat? No, nobody changes their thermostat. It's fixed, right? So 24/7, you have your temperature set to 72 degrees in many cases. All that energy is being wasted. And the idea here is to actually find ways to eke out those gains. The next slide really talks about a framework again when you think about IoT integration. As you evolve, as your customers evolve and their needs evolve, IoT is going to be quite real, right? And what I mean by IoT is that there's another slide explaining that. But the key notion here is to look at the advanced things you would be able to do with lighting, right? That is absolutely not related to lighting, right? So to be able to book a room, right? To be able to go to Marriott and say, like, I want to know exactly when my room is going to get cleaned. All these kinds of solutions can be actually solved for using the IoT framework. But in this case, it's no longer just the LLC piece of it, right? You as a designer, you as a manufacturer, have to think about cloud analytics. You have to think about dashboards, and how do you make it easy for your users to adopt some of these technologies. And then let's not forget AI. These are some of the future trends I see sort of evolving, and it's quite real. Many of these use cases are actually real. People are solving this in their own pace, but you're going to see more of the use for predictive maintenance. The large language models that we know today for AI are going to be in lighting, and it's a matter of time and how people are going to adopt some of these new trends. So let's see, how do we make this real, right? End of the day, we learned about LLCs, the growth in LLCs, and how do you future proof your customers needs, right, by solving their needs today but giving them the option to adopt these IoT concepts in the future. And so in my mind, the real answer is modularity, right? And this is a basic design principle. As a mechanical engineer, I can tell you, when you build things more modular, right, things fit well, right? Think the IKEA model, right? You have certain things, you're able to fit these things together and create a great solution out of that. So that's how I believe, it's a one of the solutions to actually unlocking and de-risking sort of the future needs. And so here is a example of how we have thought about modularity. In our products today, we have basically a receptacle. It's a USB receptacle, which is an open protocol standard. We have put that into our luminaires, and then we put sensors, and the sensors have the intelligence built into it. And as the technology evolves, right, we are able to basically give you a different sensor, right? So in this whole process, you're avoiding any kind of fixture replacement, but you are future proofing your customers for those future needs. So this is my last slide, and these are the key takeaways from the today's session. So LLCs are real. The market has spoken. I mean, there is absolute proof points that this is a growing segment in the lighting control space. And so again, there is tons of value beyond lighting, which is I think what we talked about in the last few slides. The frameworks that I was mentioning about distributed controls and centralized controls, and the choices of protocols between proprietary and open protocols, right? I do see wireless is winning. There's a lot of people moving towards wireless technologies. These are quite robust, real, and advancements are always happening, and new standards are being built. So I think the idea here is to not think in terms of just these protocols, but think in terms of systems and think in terms of platform, right? And then we talk about the modularity and how do you build a spec around the future proof part of it. So what can you design in your system that is truly modular, right? It could be a component, it could be a software technology, it could be your software itself, right? Or it could be some other ways of integrating these different things to be able to make that future proof, right? So just a parting thought. So it's for those folks who are thinking about lighting controls and specifying them, right? It's not about just dimming and switching and those kinds of things. It's not just lighting the space, but it's to really instrument that, right? And so that's what I end my conversation. Happy to take any questions. Thank you. All right. There's a mic. Thanks, man.
All right, I'd like to thank everybody for coming this morning. Those of you who hung out for the to the end of the presentation, we really appreciate your participation and your engagement. Obviously, Umesh is here at the show, and we'll be here at the show for the next couple of days. So if you want to connect with him, they'll be at the MaxLight booth, or certainly after the show. But certainly, any questions on NEMRA lighting, we're here as well. We have a booth up in the front of the show, and I'm happy to spend time chatting with anybody about the association and the benefits that we bring to our members. So thank you very, very much. If you did not have breakfast, please help yourself. And I look forward to talking with you guys throughout the show. So thank you very, very much for coming. Appreciate it.